The Texans have given us every reason to believe that they are Super Bowl contenders this season, but what are the biggest reasons to believe that they might not go all the way? We're going to talk about that and more on this Bullpen Bit. Hey y'all, I'm James Roy, and if you are looking for Texans content, you have come to the right place. If you're looking for a long-form Texans podcast, this is just a shorter version of that, a little micro topic discussion, if you will. If you want to hear Tom and I talk about the Texans, we do that 3 times a week, so make sure you tune in. The Texans enter the 2024 season as a true juggernaut. There are very few, if any, people that believe the Texans don't at least have a significant chance at pursuing a Super Bowl this season. Those people are probably looking at the sophomore slump potential, but if you look at what the Texans put on the field last year and you add that to what they've done this offseason, they've certainly, at least on paper, taken a step forward. And if you ask most people, they have entered contender status. Now, obviously, we need to see all of that play out on the field, but what are the biggest things that are preventing that from happening for the Texans? I have composed a list of 3 potential pitfalls for the Texans this season, and I'm going to go over them in a very particular order. We're going to start with the lowest odds and then the most critical potential weakness that I believe the Texans have. At number 3 is safety. I've spoken at length about this, but in an ideal world, safety works out, but there are some potential pitfalls for the safety position if you really look at it. Jimmy Ward missed significant time last year, and Jalen Petrie took a step back last year. I think both of those things are redeemable and can definitely be fixed. There's also the fact that Jalen Petrie is being moved into more of a nickel role. If that's going to be the case throughout the season and they decide to go with Eric Murray, who would look like the heir apparent at the safety position if Jalen Petrie is not mainly playing safety, then you have the question of, do you trust Eric Murray to be a starting safety in the NFL? Justin Simmons recently came off the market, and that was really the last call for the Texans to address the position going into the season, at least with an all-pro caliber starting level safety on the free agent market. I put this one at 3 for obvious reasons. I think that Jimmy Ward's health is probably the deepest concern to have here. I think that if you get serviceable play from Eric Murray and Jimmy Ward stays healthy and Jalen Petrie truly is really comfortable and dominates in this star safety, nickel box safety role that he's going to be in, that the safety position should not be the most concerning thing for the Texans. And in fact, it probably really shouldn't be a concern at all. That, of course, also hinges on the pass rush, but that's not an issue with this team, so we're not going to really talk about that. Before I say number 2 and number 1, I need to say that they're pretty interchangeable depending on severity. So I would say it's almost 1A and 1B, but I'll deliver them in the order that I believe to be true, starting with number 2, which is the offensive line. The Texans' offensive line is mostly a sure bet. You've got Laramie Tunsil. As long as Titus Howard can stay healthy, he's there, and you've got Shaq Mason. The real question mark comes in, is Juice Scruggs going to be able to, 1, be healthy, but 2, also be as good as his draft position would suggest? And is Kenyon Green ready to be as good as his draft position would suggest? There were a number of times where the offensive line last season felt like the reason the Texans weren't reaching their potential. I don't think it was as bad as it could have been. With the number of injuries that the Texans endured at that position, it almost feels like they did 10 times better than they probably should have. That being said, last offseason we were talking about a starting offensive line that looks very similar to what the Texans will likely trot out this week. And when you talk about something being an issue and needing to be addressed, usually there is some form of change. Now, in this case, the change comes in health. The Texans' offensive line was not healthy last year. There was very few, if any, opportunities to see the offensive line as it was projected to be in the preseason. And so with that in mind, I think that the offensive line should be able to get up to the level that it needs to be at. But if there is a fall off or if someone falls short, it could be a very severe issue that not even Joe Mixon being added to the team can fix. As far as depth goes, there is semi-trustworthy depth at every position across the offensive line, namely Blake Fisher. Seems like he will be a solid swing tackle that could eventually take the starting role if he shows well. Kendrick Green showed really well in a game at left guard last year before going down injured, and Jarrett Patterson showed well at center for a long stretch before he kind of hit his rookie moment and then inevitably went down injured. But overall, I'd prefer to see the starters stay healthy, and I'm just still mildly concerned because we haven't really gotten confirmation that this group is meshing and ready to fire on all cylinders. Now for number one, the most likely thing to trip up the Texans going down the stretch is the linebacker position. And if you look back and you've been following me for any amount of time, you probably think that this list looks very eerily similar to my list of the Texans' biggest draft needs. And that's because I was one of the few people who said the Texans should probably address the linebacker position in the draft with high draft capital. And they did come away from the draft with a linebacker in the 6th round. Outside looking in, I'm not at practices, I'm not in the Texans organization. It would appear as though Christian Harris, Azeez Al-Shaair, those are your guys with the amount that teams run nickel nowadays. Those are truly your starting linebackers. And then in base defense, you add Henry To'oTo'o, and you feel pretty all right with that starting lineup. You know, To'oTo'o is not like a premier level starting linebacker, but he's there. He's good. And I think under the tutelage of D'Amico, I'd expect him to improve. Where the problem lies is in depth. Christian Harris has already missed most of training camp and the preseason injured. He came back on a night practice and literally left gingerly during that practice after being back for the first time. So with that in mind, and with the way that injuries affected the O-line group that we talked about previously, I would suspect that the Texans might not be as comfortable as they're leading on with their linebacker group, considering that at points in this preseason, their highest performers in the depth have been players that are consistent special teams contributors that typically aren't called upon a lot to make plays on defense. Don't get me wrong, Neville Hewitt and Jake Hansen being great depth piece linebackers would be great for a lot of reasons. That they're great special teams contributors. It's versatility. It's compacting your roster into guys that meet multiple roles. It makes sense. But do I believe in this moment that those are your strong depth pieces that can do for the Texans what needs to be done if there's an injury? I'm not there yet. I would love to be wrong. I would love for them to be the guys that make the roster and be the guys that step up in the event of an injury or when they are needed. But do I have a lot of confidence in that? Not at the moment. Is there a solution for this problem? There's some veterans on the market, Shaq Leonard, a couple of other guys that probably could be maybe the third linebacker or potentially a veteran presence that would be trustworthy to step in relief. Time will tell. The Texans could be waiting for a cut down day. They could be waiting to see what goes down, who's cutting who, so they can pick one up on that final day to add to their 53-man roster. Who knows? But I have trouble believing the Texans like what they have in the linebacker room. They've said out loud multiple times that they really like their safety room. I've got no reason to believe they don't like their O-line group, but linebacker, I'm not convinced that they are fully satisfied with the group that they have in the building right now, just from a depth perspective. So I would be interested to see how the Texans address that. This has been a bullpen bit. It's a little shorter than the normal podcast and talk about, a very specific topic, lock in. It's just me and not Tom with me. If you're interested in a Texans podcast, we do have the bullpen in its full capacity. We do previews, recaps, a live episode in the middle of the week. If you're interested in something like that, it streams on YouTube. If you're watching it, if you're listening, it's going to be on Spotify and Apple Music. Make sure you tune in and like, comment, and subscribe. As always, thank you for watching. Stay classy, Houston, and vamos Texans. Thanks for tuning into The Bullpen, a Texans podcast. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow along for more Texans talk from The Bullpen.
Pick the handoff. Stroud.